Sure, as Ariane told previously, we are really happy of having you here, and I'm not going to do a real introduction because we would like to know more about your career, asking some questions. So I will start with the first one. Um, we would like to know when did you decide to become an archaeologist and why did you choose to work in Latin America? What motivated you to do so?
Well, that's a very good question. I went to university and I didn't start as an anthropology major. I started with another major, but I took an anthropology course and I really liked it. And I ended up graduating with a degree in anthropology and wondering what I was going to do. I wasn't too concerned. My friends and family, I think, were more concerned than I was, but I wasn't too concerned because my goal in life at that point was to be a wilderness canoe guide, which was my summer job, as you know, many Canadians do. And I'd done canoeing and camping all my life, and I I had a summer job. So I think it was really when I started graduate school that I decided to, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And I wanted to work in Latin America. Trent had a really strong emphasis in Latin American archaeology with Paul Healy working in the Maya area in Belize in particular and inspiring so many of us to follow in Maya archaeology, and also John and Teresa Topic, who uh, were doing research in Peru. And I had an opportunity to go to Peru with them just before I started graduate school. And it was wonderful. And I'd taken courses from both of them as both John Topic and Paul Healy as an undergraduate. So I was exposed to really a lot of high culture research in ancient civilizations and so forth in both areas. And it really inspired me to want to continue. I also think I when I didn't know what I wanted to do, I thought about uh, what you can do with a career in anthropology and what would be suited to me. And I thought, well, archaeology might be a good thing because I like working outside. I'm pretty social and I like discovering things. I like problem solving. To various archaeologists who had projects over the winter in Central America. And I ended up getting a positive response from Fred Lang, who was working at the National Museum of Costa Rica. And so I went down there for 5 months and spent the winter in Costa Rica. And I learned several things. One is I really liked archaeology. He gave me lots of opportunities and it was wonderful. Another thing is I learned Spanish. I had not taken Spanish. I took other languages and they don't speak any other languages, especially the remote Costa Rican field school I was on. And it was really humbling at first not to be able to communicate at all. Um, and the third thing I think I learned was that just because you're Canadian doesn't mean you have to spend all your time in the cold winter if you have an opportunity to go somewhere else. So anyway, I had a great experience and continued on through my master's at Trent, and then I went on from there.
Thank you, Heather. So I'll take the next question. Um, Maybe you could expand a little bit more then on your biography and career path. So you just told us about Trent, but what did you do after Trent and where did this lead you?
Okay, well, I'm from Toronto, first of all. That's, it's a great city. I know and Vancouver's a great city too, Calgary. There's so many great places in Canada. But I I went to Trent because that's where all my friends went. And it turned out well for me because it's a great university. But I really wanted to continue on in my archaeology, but I wanted to have a more broad background in Latin America. And there aren't very many schools who have both disciplines, both areas of archaeology. And I was really lucky to get a SSHRC, Social Sciences Humanities doctoral fellowship. And so it allowed me a lot more flexibility. And I ended up applying and going to University of California, Santa Barbara, which which was is a wonderful program. And I really liked it. It's also, I had a dream of going to Southern California. I'd never been there before. I didn't go and check it out beforehand. I just defended my thesis, did some corrections, got in my car with my dog, and drove across the United States and arrived in Santa Barbara and started grad school. And I had a wonderful time there. I graduated, and then actually a friend of mine sent me the job advert for LSU, Louisiana State University. And I remember she wrote, it was like on paper in a letter. And she said, I know you'll probably never apply, but I thought I'd send this to you anyway. And I found that note recently. So I applied, and I thought, wow, LSU. I knew about their focus on Latin America, and I knew about all of their research on sea level and coastal adaptations in geology and geography. And so I applied. And so they actually called me down for an interview and then offered me the job. So I started at LSU, and it's I've had a great opportunities here, and it's a research university. I had no idea there are universities all over the place in the United States, not like Canada. I mean, you can name all. I could probably name all of the Canadian universities in 5 minutes, but I could not begin to name all of the universities in the United States. So I was really fortunate to end up at a research university, and had lots of opportunities here. And I've continued to go to Belize and do my research.
I'll take over the next question. So could you share a bit more about your first trip to Mesoamerica?
Oh yeah. So my first trip, not really Mesoamerica, it's Central America, was in Costa Rica. And I arrived there, and I stayed with an archaeologist in Costa Rica, in San Jose. And the next morning, they put me on a bus up to Guanacaste, which is now northwestern Costa Rica, which is now like a real beach vacation destination. But at that point, it was unknown. And I think Fred Lang was had his team reviewing coastal sites that are now beach vacations. But I was sent into the interior on a field school, isolated, as I said. And I think something happened on the entrance to this hacienda. There was some conversation, which I couldn't understand, but there was a lot of animation and pointing. And it seemed to me like somebody had been bitten by a snake. And I noticed that on the project, everyone carried machetes, sharp machetes everywhere. And, I soon learned about culebras, but I had great opportunities after I was there for 6 weeks or so. My Spanish got pretty good. And Fred Lang sent Lynette Knorr and I, the only women, into the interior to explore. He handed us a sheaf of air photos and said, hire horses, find ways, take the bus, go into the interior and survey these areas between the Atlantic and the Pacific and report back on weekends. Well, that seemed like a fun thing to do, and we were not intimidated. So we had lots of fun. My first experience in Mesoamerica, however, was when I did my master's research. And this was a great opportunity that Liz Graham was the commissioner of archaeology for the government of Belize. And she and David Pendergast came up to Trent and met with Paul Healy, and they had a Canadian International Development Agency grant, a CETA grant, and that they developed and got for education of people in the Department of Archaeology, now the Institute of Archaeology in Belize. And Jaime Awe got a scholarship there. And he'd actually, I think, asked Jaime, or Jaime had asked Paul, can you find a way to get me a scholarship to Canada so I can get education? Because he wanted that. And so they did get that. And according the story is that also Liz wanted, as a commissioner, wanted someone to excavate this island site near Belize City, just off the coast, just off the airstrip in Belize City, called Moho Cay. And so Paul called me in and said, how would I like to run a field school at Moho Cay? I said, sure. So this was actually before BVAR. So there's something before most people in archaeology have been on the BVAR project. It was very successful, but this is like before BVAR. I had 19 field school students, and we lived in Belize City. Everybody survived. We had great time. We worked out of St. John's College, and it was really it was a great experience for me. And I continued after that. The island was destroyed by tourism development, and David Pendergast, who was the external person on my thesis committee, he suggested I go down to southern Belize where nothing happens and go to Wild Cane Cay and some other cays, which I did. So then I continued in southern Belize, and I haven't left.
Thanks so much, Heather. It's a real pleasure to engage with you on this discussion today. We were really curious as well to know what was kind of the early days in underwater archaeology for you, and sort of when you started to get more into that specialization and approaching things more from those perspectives.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most people, when they think of underwater archaeology, they think of shipwrecks, and that's certainly a big part of it. But the other part of underwater archaeology is submerged landscapes, and that's related to, as a result of sea level rise, which has been going on since the glaciers retreated and the water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans and submerged even Paleo-Indian sites off the west coast of Florida, but submerged landscapes around the world. And of course, today, with global climate change and sea level rise, it's a real problem. But I wasn't concerned about that when I was doing my dissertation work, for example, on Wild Cane Cay. I was interested in coastal trade and doing stratigraphic excavations to find trade goods, particularly obsidian, volcanic glass in different dated deposits to try to figure out the role of the island, but in trade. But we soon discovered, even in the dry season, that the water table was really high. So by about 40 centimeters below the ground surface, in the height of the dry season, we hit the water table. And so as a graduate student, I was trained to keep excavating to sterile soil until we don't find anything else. So we excavated over 2 meters below the ground surface before we hit sterile deposits. So, and that was kind of rough. This is on the island. It was all muddy, and we screened in the sea. We excavated 10 centimeters in a 1x1, and then screened it, and then bailed out the excavation with buckets. Later, we tried using a pump, a gas-powered pump, but the problem with using equipment in remote locations, we found the pump would break, and then you need to get someone to repair it, and the parts aren't available. You have to get them from Guatemala. But a bucket, I could just get another bucket. So it was so we used buckets. Then I had Earthwatch volunteers and LSU field school students, and they would say, "Why are there so many artifacts in the water?" And I said, "Don't worry about it. The whole island is covered. It's a whole site." But I was wondering about that. And so after my dissertation, I continued to work on Wild Cane Cay and in the coastal area. And we did stratigraphic shovel tests, 172 of them around the island, in the water and in the mangroves. And we found archaeological deposits down below a meter below the sea floor, which indicated to me, we looked at the slope and the density of artifacts, that these were in situ, in place artifacts, that the site was once about 10 acres, is now only about 3.5 acres. And so areas perhaps in the coastal area that were once sites or were in shallow water. So I looked on air photos, started going in our boat, had a wooden dory, started going around looking for shallow places around sites, and then continued into a shallow coastal lagoon, Punta Icacos Lagoon, near Wild Cane Cay. And that's where we found the salt making sites. So, and at that point, we would traverse the lagoon back and forth, like doing pedestrian survey, only we're in a boat. And I had my Earthwatch volunteers and students, field school students, who had no experience in archaeology. So they thought this was normal. Everyone's got bathing suits on and swim shoes and sun hats and sunscreen. And I said, look over the side of the boat. And if you see something, jump over and we'll come and get you. Don't worry. And I had a rule, which was someone needed to stay in the boat, preferably the driver. And this was a rule because my boat driver at the time, Orlando, was very competitive, and he liked to look over the side and cut the engine and jump over and find things first. So I ended up staying in the boat a lot because I had this idea of us stranded in the lagoon and the boat just drifting off into the sunset. Yeah, so then we started, doing other things like pedestrian survey, and it wasn't until we found the wood that we really changed our techniques.
Hi, Heather. I have another question for you. So it's been great hearing a little bit more about the challenges of specifically developing a methodology for underwater archaeology in Belize. But I was wondering, especially for some of our listeners who might be archaeology students or just starting out with their career in archaeology, if you might be able to talk a little bit more about some other challenges that you've faced in terms of carrying out a successful field season, either in Belize or in other places where you've worked. And if you might also discuss some of the different ways that you've overcome those challenges.
Yeah, I think for me, the big challenge is logistics. I work in a really remote area. We stay with a host family 15 miles north of Punta Gorda, which is the southernmost town, the capital of the Toledo district in Belize. So we stay with the host family, and their living conditions are really nice compared to what I used to do, which was camp on an uninhabited island like Frenchman's Cay or Wild Cane Cay, where we had to bring in all our water and bring in all our food and set up communication system and live in tents and bathe in the sea. So at Village Farm, where we stay now with our host family, they have an organic chocolate farm, although, we don't have chocolate because it's just the cacao pods, but you can actually eat the fleshy fruit and it tastes sweet, not like chocolate, but we don't very often. So the logistics are really the issue. And then from there, we go another 15 miles by boat only. So there's no roads to get here. Float planes are banned because of drugs and so forth, illegal people arriving from other countries. So the only travel is by boat, and no one goes there. No one goes in the coastal waters. It's now a Port Honduras Marine Reserve, and they have rangers who go out with the Coast Guard mainly looking for fishermen who are still using nets or illegal fishing or hunting in the area. But we're really out there by ourselves, and so I think the challenges are living in a remote area. And a couple of the things that I do is really organized. I mean, I think archaeologists are organized anyway. We kind of think like spreadsheets, and we're really, really into organization. So I give my students or field school students, a lot of information before. People have to be able to swim, have to know about their health situation. And I think another thing that I really like to do is have a team of staff members who are alert and aware of their surroundings. So it's really, and get along well with people. People who watch out for other people, and because you never know what's going to happen in a remote area or anywhere on an archaeological site. But being so remote, it's really important. And then I have rules. So being organized and having rules, and communicating a lot. And in the field, on my project, everybody works together. So we'll go to a site, and like this past year, two of my master's students, Sarah and Alex, were doing their master's thesis work, and they were each going to be excavating in a building at an underwater site, Chuck Ayin, Young Crocodile. And there were several buildings there, and we were wondering what they were used for, following up a project that an NSF funded project with my co-PI, Dr. Corey Sills, former student, now associate professor at University of Texas at Tyler, in Eastern Texas. And we were looking at labor organization, how the salt industry was organized, and whether these were just people who came out and made salt on a daily basis from the cays, or whether people lived there seasonally, like they often do in places, or whether they lived there permanently, and who controlled the production. Was it the cities in the interior, or was this locally controlled? How does it compare to other big production areas like Kolha, where they were making lots of stone points? I can show this nice 3D printed replica of a stem point. How does it compare? So the students were really trying to find out whether it was what they had by putting a underwater transect through each building, to see if they were salt kitchens where they were boiling brine in pots over fires. Like, here's another thing. This is from the Philippines, but I think this is what they are doing. And then this one, in the case of the Philippines, they were boiling it down so it's hardened, and then trading them like this, and sometimes cutting them in half or quarters to trade. So I think that was going on. This is from my friend Andrea Jankowski, who works in the Philippines on ethnoarchaeology of salt production. It's pretty cool. So we were trying to find that, and if they actually were living at these salt works. And so what we've determined through excavation and studying the artifacts and so forth, both my students believe they have salt kitchens. And the third building, which Corey and I and another former student, Dr. Rachel Watson, now the Louisiana State archaeologist, who takes her vacation for a month every year and comes down and works with us. She has a lot of good common sense. We need her, as well as being a good archaeologist. But we were working in another building, Building A, which we believe was a residence. So I think what we have is something very much like what was happening all over the Maya area, residential household groups and buildings surrounding a plaza. Can't see anything, it's just water. But when we map things with a total station, you can see where the artifacts are, where the actual wooden building posts that we have preserved below the sea floor, where they are. And but in the case of Chakayin and some of the other sites, it was surplus household production. They were making more salt than they needed, and they were, I think, standardizing the pots, the salt making pots. So it was some kind of mass production, and they could then trade solid salt cakes. I think they were breaking the pots at the site because we find lots of broken pots, in contrast to the Philippines, where they're trading them in the pots. But we actually found lots of broken salt making pots, and we've reconstructed some, like this one. It was reconstructed from just a pottery rim sherd. So if you have enough of the rim down the whole shape of part of it, we reconstructed it and then figured out the volume, and then figured out what a salt cake might weigh, and so could figure out how much salt might have been traded, because everybody wants to know, the facts. You guys know, people want to know how many people lived at your site, what were they doing? They want to, what were the reasons for the collapse of the Maya? They all want to know those important questions that take us so long to even approach, that we're really very cautious about answering questions like that. Yeah, we work very closely together, the whole team. I don't say, okay, go over there and excavate. They have to learn how to do underwater, and in a shallow area, the big problem is, how do you keep away from the sea floor? How do you not damage the resource? We've excavated using hoses from a gas-powered compressor in deeper water, but for the most part, our excavations are shallow, so we're floating on the seafloor or floating on the surface, and we have our excavation bags in swim floats. We fill them up and we tie them to a pulley system, and they get floated off site in the water. And my boat driver loves to screen. He likes to find things, finds little pieces of obsidian and so forth. And then so we're in the water swimming. It's quite a sight to see.
Well, so I will take the next question. You have talked about the importance of communication in the fieldwork. That's for sure. That's really, really important I think, in any teamwork, right? And you have talked a little bit about communication, but we would like to know, how do you manage communication in other language, you and your students, and possible cultural barriers, not only language, but also cultural barriers?
Well, either luckily for me or unluckily, in Belize, the official language is English. And so all the Spanish that I learned in Costa Rica and Peru, it's not useful. When I find Hispanic people working in Baton Rouge, I go up and talk to them. When I find the few people in Southern Belize speaking Spanish, I'll go up and talk to them. But it's mainly the official language is English, and there are people who speak Spanish in other areas of Belize. There are, of course, lots of Maya people, but there's no one living anywhere near. Once we leave Punta Gorda, there's no one. We don't see anybody except our host family, and occasionally a ranger. We'll see them, but not always. So we don't have any interaction, except when we come to town every couple of weeks to buy more food, because we now cook for ourselves, buy more food, and we will see people. And so, but people for the most part are speaking English, but I like to share information, share what we're finding. And I used to have a newsletter, LSU Maya Archaeology News, #1, #2, etc., that I would hand out to people in town. Now I have a Facebook page, and I have a website, underwatermaya.com, and I talk to a lot of people. I have business cards made in Punta Gorda that are colorful, that have my website on, because everybody's got a cell phone in Belize, and that's how they communicate. They, on Facebook, there could be some people here who are from Belize. They're always communicating on Zoom, via Facebook. That has really liberated knowledge, and so we do that. And the another thing that we do is we do some outreach. Of course, the government of Belize is in charge of tourism development. They don't want archaeologists doing things on our own, but we've developed a couple of permanent exhibits featuring 3D printed replicas of our finds. I hired someone to make cabinets with glass fronts that are locked, and then laminated posters and images and text to go along with it. And there's one in the Tourism Information Center in downtown Punta Gorda, which is there for forever, and we update it. And then there's another one at the ranger station. The marine tour guides who take people out fly fishing, they said, if we put an exhibit at the ranger station, people would have to hire them to take them out to see it, and that would enhance the tourism experience. They could go see manatee, they can go to the Keys and snorkel and swim, and they could go to the ranger station and see what we're finding. So we've done a lot of those kinds of things on a really basic level. We also have a 3D printed replica, full size, of the ancient Maya wooden canoe paddle that we found. And it's the only ancient Maya wooden canoe paddle that's ever been found. And the original I had conserved at Texas A&M by a great polymer process that was patented by a Canadian, C. Wayne Smith from St. Thomas, Ontario, who just retired recently from Texas A&M. But this is a great polymer process which allows things to sit without any temperature or humidity control. Anyway, the original we took back to Belize, and it's in the Museum of Belize, but it's in storage. So the only place you can see it is actually a 3D printed replica in a display case in Punta Gorda. So it's hopefully the original will be put on display somewhere.
Very interesting. Thanks, Heather. Since we are talking about fieldwork a lot, I think our listeners would love to also hear about perhaps fieldwork anecdotes that you may have. So maybe it can be something that's funny, or maybe something that was dangerous that ended up resolving itself well. But anything you would love to share with us.
Okay. Well, I think one thing, it's not really funny, but it's I do have some scary things. But it is, to me, it's interesting, and it raises a broader question, which is, how do we discover new things? What's the nature of scientific discovery? Because in archaeology, we build on evidence, we build on the known, we build on asking questions and trying to figure out possible outcomes for various scenarios. And so how do we find out something new that's beyond that? And, I think of, for example, the Folsom discovery at Folsom, New Mexico in 1926 of a Paleo-Indian Folsom Point. Archaeologists had denied that people could have been in the Americas at the same time as Ice Age animals, and it took an ornithologist from the Natural Museum of History in Colorado, who had no vested interest in archaeology, going out with a geologist, and they found this site, and they left it in situ. And they found a Folsom Point embedded in the ribcage of an extinct bison, and that was really a turning point. So often new discoveries come from other people, not archaeologists. But in our case, we'd found the underwater sites in this coastal lagoon, Punta Caucus Lagoon, and we had actually excavated 3 of them, and using traditional techniques of land-based, setting up at that point a transit and excavations and using shovels and shoveling into screens and then studying the artifacts. And I wrote a book, Salt, White Gold of the Ancient Maya, and on studying the material, and I returned 31 boxes of artifacts, of salt making artifacts, to the Institute of Archaeology, Government of Belize. And then people were asking me, like Tony Andrews, who worked on the north coast of the Yucatan on salt archaeology by solar evaporation. He said, "Oh, that you couldn't have made much salt there. How much salt was made? And do you have any other sites?" So I thought, yes, I got to go and look. So I fortunately got a faculty research grant from Louisiana State University and set out to do pedestrian survey systematically in this lagoon and see if there were more sites to answer Tony and other people's questions. And so we started out doing pedestrian survey, and this is really difficult in the water, especially it's not sandy, it's a mangrove swamp with classic mangroves all around. And we were wearing rubber boots to protect our feet, not to keep our feet dry, and had bathing suits on. And I had a camera in a plastic bag under one bathing suit strap, and a notebook in a plastic bag under the other, and I think we were carrying some bags to carry things in. And we're walking along, and it was like the Stairmaster. What I imagine, I've never done it, but put one foot in and then you haul it out, and it's just really a lot of work. And we're walking along, but we did find pottery. We found the rim sherds, and we found the vessel supports. And my goal was to find enough that I could do some measurements and quantify them, see if they were standardized. And my boat driver, Jackie, who once I had a grant, so I could hire someone instead of me driving a motorized dory out to sea. I hired someone with a fast boat to go back and forth. And he was saying, "Hey man, these are posts." And I said, "Jackie, this is a swamp. It's just sticks. Wood doesn't preserve in the rainforest. Wood decays." And so, that's what we know. No one had found ancient Maya wooden buildings. So finally I thought, okay, there were just some little pieces of wood. I said, these could be stumps from old trees. Like in Louisiana, we've got stumps in the swamps here that are cypress trees that have been cut down. It could just be a stick. So if it's a stick, it's just going to go in at an odd angle. If it's a tree root, we're going to find a tree root that goes down and branches out. And if it's a post, it's going to go straight down, and then it's going to be sharpened at the end. And we were ill prepared to do any kind of excavation, but we had our techniques. My boat driver, Jackie, and I had this idea of just taking a few deep breaths and then exhaling and then diving down. We were in about waist deep water, diving down, holding onto the seafloor and digging around the wood. Not pulling it up, but just digging around. A volunteer I found who later came to LSU and earned his master's or earned his PhD, Mark Robinson. I found him in Punta Gorda reading my salt book. And I when my other worker quit, I asked him to join the project, and he did. But Mark liked to be held down underwater until he started thrashing his legs. And my graduate student at the time, just didn't want to go underwater at all. And that was fine. We needed someone to keep watch. But gradually, we were getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And I said, it's loose. So I started pulling it up, and you could see this piece of wood coming out of the water. And then at about almost a meter of length, the end was sharpened. And I said, it's a post. I was shocked. And my boat driver, Jackie, said, yeah, man. And then we were all really frantic, and we swam to the shore and got sticks and looked for more and marked them. And then they all looked at me because, they do that. you know, when you're in charge of a project, you know all the answers. So they said, what is it? And I said, it's a salt shed. Well, I'm not too, I think I'd still go with that, except now I call them salt kitchens, where they were boiling the brine in pots over fires. That's all they were doing. But we don't show those photos with little sticks coming out of the water. That was site 15. And I thought, oh my God, I wonder what was at the other sites where we didn't find anything. Including, whoa, all the 3 sites we even excavated that were in my salt book. So we went back to those sites, not that year, but another time, and we found hundreds of posts. If you're not looking for them, how are you going to find them? They're not supposed to be there. And they are, in my defense and defense of the team, they are really difficult to find. You have to feel, you have to think about they might be there, and you have to feel the seafloor and the mangrove peat, which is holding them in. It's very solid and it's almost like wood. You can actually feel around a post, and by the time you're all the way around, you realize that you've created a post out of mangrove peat. So the peat and the wood are hard to distinguish. But that year when we did the first survey and we found that first post and then some more posts, we went back to site 14, and that's where we found the canoe paddle. It was actually my master's student, Kevin, who was being kind of quiet, who hadn't put his head underwater previously, but he was being kind of quiet. It's like, Kevin, what have you got? He says, something smooth. And it just brought the rest of us like vultures. So you can really swim quickly and you can get to a destination quickly in the water. We all descended on it. And in fact, we uncovered this full-size canoe paddle and took photos of it and then put it back, because we realized as soon as we started taking things out of this wood out of the water, it began to decay. So I waited until I knew I was going to get an export permit before we brought it out. So I think that's the nature of scientific discovery and how archaeologists find things, and then how we solve problems is pretty exciting. I have some stories that are that I have in my book, In Search of My Sea Traders, which is about where I report what we find, like the archaeology, as well as doing the archaeology. And I've worked with a lot of volunteers, especially from Earthwatch and students through field schools. And so I think that really drove me to write about this kind of what my editor called reflexive archaeology, which I just telling a story. But one of our kind of potentially dangerous things, we were living on Frenchman's Key, another island, and we were going into town to pick up a new group of volunteers. And it was a beautiful day. I had 2 dories. I was driving one, and Melissa, a former graduate student, was driving the other. It was one of those beautiful sunny days where dolphins were leaping out of the water and blue sky and very peaceful. And suddenly there was a loud noise from behind and a huge splash in the water, a fiery explosion. And I turned around and I saw out of the mist behind us this huge battleship. The British Navy was doing target practice on the mainland. They actually lease part of my research area and Seven Hills, and they were doing target practice. And clearly they needed the practice because they were missing their target, and they were getting between us and the mainland. And so I called I had a 32-foot dugout canoe, motorized dugout canoe. I called to Jody, my graduate student who was in the front of the boat, and I said, Jody, get out the flares and light one. Let's let those people know we're here, because they were much bigger than us. And so she did that, and that actually brought a British military helicopter, some young guy, probably 18 years old, and I got on my 2-meter radio, and I'm talking to people at the Texaco gas station in Punta Gorda, And our host family, we didn't live with them at that time. And it's like, Max, what's going on? And the people at our host family were concerned because they were missing and explosions were landing on their property right beside it. So I got into town and I called the army base, and they assured me that it wasn't live ammunition and they were leaving that day. Neither were true. I mean, I don't know. What is a big fiery explosion in the water? What, I guess that's not live, but anyway, we survived. They do put a notice in the newspaper, don't travel in the coastal waters north of Punta Gorda for the next 2 weeks. But we didn't get the daily delivery or weekly delivery of the newspapers on Frenchman's Key. And you have to go out anyway, the few fishermen and then us. So that was, that was kind of dangerous. And there's other things. We had encounters with snakes that we didn't know. We're not poisonous at all, but you never know. So I do tell some of those stories in my book, In Search of My Sea Traders, but everybody has survived.
Thank you, Heather, for sharing those amazing stories. It's very interesting to see how fieldwork can be so unexpected and how you can never be really prepared for fieldwork. So thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to ask you about what you love the most about your career and what do you like the least?
I think what I really like about archaeology and my job at LSU is I get to do research. I love doing research. I love every aspect of research. I work with a lot of students. I like to surround myself with smart students. I have 7 undergraduate student workers who are president's aide student workers that I recruit for my intro to archaeology class. So I like teaching as well. I'm the only one who teaches intro to archaeology, and I love that class. It's kind of my recruiting class. The state archaeologist, Rachel Watson, who comes on our field project every year, she started in my intro to archaeology class, and then she took my field school on Wild Cane Cay. So I've actually gotten a lot of students that way, but I like field work. I like problem solving. The underwater archaeology we do, the shallow underwater archaeology we do, we are always trying to figure out better ways to solve problems, how to recover material. And so that's always exciting. I like studying artifacts. I like data. I love it when, all the data, because we don't excavate information, we excavate things that have to be turned into information. I love playing with the data. I love writing. I spend a lot of my time writing grant proposals to do field work and to fund other kinds of research in the lab. And so I like everything. Oh, I like working with people. I like the adventure, I have to say. There's a certain amount. Why do we all work in Latin America when we could work in Canada, eh? There's something about working in a foreign country that, is there's an adventure aspect of it, but it's also science. I can't think of anything except right now I have a 20-year-old dog who's got congestive heart failure, but he takes pills. So my least favorite thing is taking care of the dog, but he's really happy, and he's in another room, probably just hanging out right now.
So should we do another question here, or should we get questions from the audience, or Okay, we could talk about, yeah, the 3D scanning. That was the next question that I had for you, Heather. So, I wanted to ask you about your use of 3D modeling and printing in your research, and what motivated you to adopt it, and what are some of the pros and cons of this technique, in your opinion?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll just start with the con. There is a sharp learning curve and takes a lot of time and effort. Most of you have probably done some 3D imaging, some 3D printing. It's getting more streamlined and more accessible to us, but it takes a lot of effort before and time, very time consuming, and to figure things out. I I became interested in it because everything that we find, as soon as we take it out of the water, begins to deteriorate. The pottery, if we just let potsherds take them out of the water, as we used to do, like an ocarina, take it out of the water, the salt, when the pottery dries, it's all saturated with salt. So the salt comes to the surface and dries and expands and just cracks and exfoliates. And I saw this happening with little figurines. And so and then the wood, of course, we wanted to be able to identify two species. And one of my former students, Mark Robinson, identified a lot of the wood. And then I have a current master's student who's going to be starting the PhD in the fall, Sarah Miller, and she started to back up start a new wood identification lab. So we have to keep that wood structure. So as soon as we take anything out of the water, we keep it wet. So we go through a lot of Ziploc bags, fill things with Ziploc bags, keep it wet. And then what do you do? I exported material for study, broken pieces of pottery for other kinds of analysis at LSU and elsewhere. We keep them in water until I exported them, then keep them wet, and then wrap them in a bag, and then put them back in water. How long can you keep things in water like that? So in 2009, I applied for and was fortunate to receive a Louisiana Board of Regents grant to start the DIVA lab, Digital Imaging and Visualization in Archaeology. And I think that name helped me get the grant, the DIVA lab. So, but I figured 3D imaging would be a way for us to have a research quality replica, digital replica of the things that are going to deteriorate. And in fact, Wayne Smith told me when they returned the canoe paddle to us conserved, he said, and I complained that there were cracks and it was cracking. He said, it's just going to continue to crack. Those cracks were there in antiquity. And I thought, our digital images are the only thing that is going to endure. So I got this grant, and on the grant, I also included a big 3D printer, the same printer that mechanical engineering had. It's like a $35,000 massive 300-pound printer that we used. In fact, we used it until 2023, almost constantly, to print things in high quality plastic. So my goal was to make research quality replicas, digital replicas, and then sometimes we'd print things to show at conferences or for teaching purposes. And I found that in order to print things, we had to downgrade our 3D images, because you can scan something and you have an enormous file, but the printers only take a certain size of file and a certain type of file. And so, and then I realized that, if we scan things for research quality, we could downgrade them for teaching. We could downgrade them for exhibits, like what we did in Belize, and we have an exhibit at LSU. So we can print things like actual size, or my little lapel pin, miniature size, and we could also we wanted to show in Punta Gorda the little ocarinas, the figurine vessels. And for example, this guy is really small. And so we just enlarged them and make them bigger for exhibit purposes. So the 3D imaging really has allowed me to have digital copies. And now I used to use the NextEngine 3D scanner, but the company went bankrupt. And so I started teaching a course or a couple of courses in 3D digital imaging, teaching it this semester. And so getting better equipment. Corey and I got a Artex Space Spider, which is a really high-end digital handheld scanner that we take to Belize. Started taking this NextEngines to Belize in 2011, and it wasn't until 2019 that I got the Artex. So we excavate in the day and scan in the evening, and then we take the digital scans back to LSU, and you can measure them too. So we don't need to do the analysis. And I think, to me, this is really exciting because we live in a 3D world. The ancient Maya lived in a 3D world. What are we doing on 2D images when we can scan things and we can measure things? And in some cases, other people have done studies with like 3D measuring of Paleo-Indian stone tools where you're looking for the curvatures and they're really small. Well, you can actually you can enlarge them, you can get into the curvature and measure things. So we've been measuring things digitally. And of course, you have to see if the scanner that you're using is actually quality, if it's going to actually the same measurements as your actual artifacts. So you need to do some comparisons, but it's an exciting world. And I think that's the way of the future. The 3D imaging that we do we can use the same software as we've got in our department a stationary LiDAR scanner. We scanned the LSU Indian mounds and some other buildings, and we've you can bring in, everything from small artifacts like this part of a cylinder and support for a pottery vessel to LiDAR images. So 3D is really the future, but it takes a lot of time and effort and money. It takes money.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. We would like to ask you maybe one of our last questions. Maybe we will let other audience to ask you maybe curiosities, ask a question, but we would like to know what challenges do you think women in archaeology face nowadays and in Latin America, not in general in Latin America, and leading an archaeological project?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, I think I just saw there's a recent issue of Journal of Archaeological Practice all about women in archaeology. I haven't had an opportunity to read any of the articles yet, but I think women in archaeology face challenges anywhere they work. I mean, we've all seen issues, but I think if you're dedicated enough and focused and determined, you can persevere. I mean, clearly one of the issues is women academics, and how do you negotiate with if you have kids, who's going to take care of the kids? I think being in academia is really lends us a lot of flexibility to have kids as well. I have a daughter now who spent a lot of her time growing up in our department, in my office, departmental parties, graduate thesis defenses, etc. But those are difficult things. I think in Latin America, women's women in archaeology face similar issues. I know a former director of the Department of Archaeology, Winnell Branch, she was acting director. She faced, as a Belizean in charge, she told me she faced a lot of discrimination because, what's a woman doing in charge? And I know now for the Institute of Archaeology, Government of Belize, Dr. Melissa Badillo, she seems like she's doing just fine, but she's surrounded herself with a very capable team to advise her and to manage archaeology. I think I've been fortunate in some ways that I always had lots of encouragement and support from my advisors, and was also very headstrong and determined of what I wanted to do and in charge. So I've had, I had my own permit to do my dissertation work in Belize on Wild Cane Cay. It's no longer allowed. You have to have a PhD before you can apply for a permit in Belize. But I've always been in charge of my project, so I've always been the one to say what goes. I have a lot of strong rules about things, and we're also, for me, being in a remote area with no one around. I mean, I did have a field school in Punta Gorda, and oh boy, it's like the bars stay open too late, and I'd wake them up at 6 a.m. But there's problems. So I think having a good team of support and being determined, and for me, working in a remote area has its drawbacks. You have to be really conscious of safety, in particular. So we have a lot of rules, and you have to communicate a lot. But having a good team really helps. And I also like to say that, well, I have three. I give my students a booklet of information about the project each year, and I have a little saying. It's like, this project, the goals are safety, research, and fun. So safety is all important. It is real research. We're doing real research. We're destroying the past. We have a permit to do it, and we've got to do it right. But we also want to enjoy it, because it's a lot of hard work. And if you don't enjoy it, if you don't have fun, it's not worth doing it. And I think, that's where we've all probably seen students who come on archaeological field schools. They realize, and with my Earthwatch volunteers that I had, some of them really thought it was wonderful, but some of them were like, wow, this is not for me. They're interested in the past, but not getting their feet wet, so to speak. But clearly, people in Latin America experience a lot. Women in Latin America experience a lot more issues than we do in Canada or the United States.
Well, thank you so much, Heather, for sharing all of this with us. We are just a little over the time, but we wanted just to make sure nobody in the audience maybe had a question for you. We don't want to take too much of your time. Anybody wanted to ask something to Heather?
I see two of my incoming doctoral students, Ellie Muller and Kendall Wren, are here.
That's really wonderful. Well, I don't see any questions or in the chat. So thank you so much, Heather, for coming today. We really appreciated your insight about, doing field work in Belize, and especially, like you say, in remote areas, which has its own pros and cons, right? So I think that is all for us. And
well, thank you so
Patricia,
much.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I really enjoy seeing all of you, because I see your names. I think CLAS, Canadian Latin American Archaeology Society, is a wonderful organization that you guys have started, because so many of us have gone to the United States to do research or elsewhere. But it's a way to stay in touch, and you have class notes, which I've submitted to, and you have various events, and So it's very nice to have this opportunity and to see all of you guys kind of in person. I feel like the Zoom experience has become very familiar to most of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much.